Hello everyone, today we are building a clean image search app using React and Tailwind CSS. We will integrate the Pexels API to access millions of free photos instantly. You will learn how to fetch data from the API, display images in a responsive grid, add a smooth loading spinner during searches, and create modal pop-ups for image previews. It's a practical project that covers essential React concepts and API integration. So let's get started. Okay guys, as you can see, I already have the setup of our project, as you can see. And now what I suggest to do is to apply some styles to it. So we will start by making our layout, and then we will go on and do our functionality. So let's apply some styles to this div. And first of all, let's say that min height will be screen so that it will take the whole visible height of the screen. Then background color will be gray 50. So let's save it. And as you can see, now the background color is a bit different. Okay, so let's wrap this text in H1. So let's say H1, and to this H1 we can apply the following styles. Let's say that text will be 4XL, then font will be bold, text will be center, and text color will be gray 800. And we can add some margin bottom, which will be 2, because under this H1 tag we're gonna have a paragraph, and here we want to say powered by Pexels API. Okay, and to this paragraph we can apply the following styles. Let's say that text will be center and text color will be gray 600, and margin bottom will be 8, because after these paragraph we're gonna have our images. So let's save it, and here it is. Okay, and now we can wrap these two into a div which will be our container. So let's say that to this div we can apply the following styles, which will be container, and if we hover over, as you can see, we have the following. And also we want to center our container, so that's why we say margin horizontally to be auto, and we can add some padding, which will be 4. So let's save it, and this is how it looks. Okay, next what I suggest to do is that we need to have a search bar. For that, inside this source folder we can create a new folder called components, and inside this folder let's say that we want to have our search bar. So let's create it. Okay, so when it comes to this search bar, of course we need to have a state for our search. So we can say search term, and by default it will be empty. And let's close this explorer, and we need to import use state hook. So let's import it. Okay, so we have our state, and we can remove this unnecessary import. So we have our state, and now instead of this div we want to have a form, and we don't need any action. So inside this form we can have a div, and inside this div we want to have an input, and type will be text, placeholder will be search for images, a value will be search term, and on change we can get access to this event. And then we say that we want to set search term to be whatever we type. So that's why we can see event.target.value. It means that whatever we type will be set as the value for search term state. Okay, and then we can apply some styles. Let's say that padding horizontally will be 4, and then padding vertically will be 3, and border color will be gray 300. Then it will be, let's say, rounded large. So let's save it and see what we have. Looks like we don't see anything because we need to render search bar component inside app.jsx. Okay, so under this paragraph, let's say that we want to have our search bar. Okay, let's save it, and here it is. So let's continue styling it. Let's say that on focus, okay, on focus, we want to remove outline. So let's say focus outline to be none, and we can say that on focus ring will be 2 and ring color will be blue 500. Okay, this is how it looks, but looks like we don't see our vertical padding because here we have an error. So let's say that we want to have vertical padding, and now it looks much better. And optionally we can add some shadow, which will be small. Okay, now under this input here we want to have our button. So let's say that we want to have our button, and to this button let's say that we want to say search, and we can also apply some styles. Let's say that background color will be blue, text will be white, and let's actually save it, and here it is. Okay, and we can remove this transition. Okay, it looks nice. So now we need to have them on one line. Okay, for that, to this div we can say that it will be flex and items will be center. So let's save it. This is how it looks. And also to this button, we can also say that padding vertically will be 3, okay? And to this button, we don't need to have any margin top. So let's remove it. And now they are on one line. And also we can give some space between them. Let's say that gap horizontally will be 4. And now it looks really nice. So now we can type something like this and click search and it's gonna work. And also optionally, we can say that type will be submit of this button. And by default, when we have a button inside of a form, its type is already submit. But anyway, we can explicitly say that the type of this button will be submit. That is great. So let's save it. And now let's come back to our app.jsx file. And now what I suggest to do is that at this point, we need to get our API key from Pexels. Okay, so let's do it. For that, inside this React image search app folder in the root, I'm going to create a file called .env and we should have it in the root. So let's delete it from here and we need to have it in the root. So let's say .env. So for that, as you can see, I have created this variable and it starts with vid underscore because since we use vid, all of our variables inside .env files should start with vid and underscore. And now I'm gonna paste the key from Pexels API. So I have done it and now we need to get access to it. To be able to get access to it, here we can create a variable. Let's say that here we want to have a constant variable which will be Pexels underscore API underscore key will be equal to import.meta.env and then the name of our variable. And also to be able to make requests, to be able to fetch and display images, we need to have Pexels API URL. So we can create a variable which will be Pexels underscore API URL and this is the URL that we need. Okay, and then we can create some states. Let's say that we want to have a state for our images and by default it will be an empty array and let's import useState. Then we need to have a state for loading. So let's say loading, by default it will be false. Then for error it will be null. And then we need to have a state for our query. So let's say query, and by default I want to say that it will be equal to nature by default, so that when someone opens our application he will not see empty page, he will see some pictures of nature. And then we can have a state for our page and by default it will be equal to 1. Okay, so now we can create a function to be able to fetch images. So let's do it. So let's say const fetch images and it will be a synchronous function and it's gonna accept search query and page number, or we can say page num for example. And as I said, by default it will be equal to nature and page num by default will be equal to 1. Okay, then we need to check if there is API key. So we need to say if there is no Pexels API key, we can say that we can set an error. So let's say set error API key is missing, please set your Pexels API key. And then of course we need to return, because if we have this error, we don't want to continue doing something else. We want to return. Then we can say that set loading will be true. And if there were some errors, we want to reset them. Then we want to have try and catch block. Okay, so here we have that we have a response. It will be equal to await fetch function, await fetch, and then we provide our Pexels API URL, then we provide our query, and per page, let's say that we want to see 20 images, for example, and then we provide our page number. And then here we can say that we want to wrap our search query inside encode URI component, and then we can provide our search query. So if we hover over, as you can see, it says that it encodes a text string as a valid component of a uniform resource identifier. Okay, then we provide our headers, and inside authorization we provide our Pexels API key so that we get identified and we get the opportunity to be able to fetch and display images. Okay, so here we have our response, and also we can console log our response. Okay, let's say that we want to console log our response. Then if our response isn't okay, we can throw new error, and here we provide response status and response status text. Great. Then we can get access to our data by saying await response.json, and we can also show the fetched data. Then we need to do the following. If page number is equal to 1, if page number is equal to 1, we need to say set images to be equal to data photos or an empty array. And also we want to say set page to be 1. Else we need to say set images and previous images. So what happens is that if we are on the first page and then we click load more, it means that we want to get the next portion of images. And at the same time, we want to keep our previous images. So that's why, as you can see here, we keep our previous images and add to them the new portion of images. Okay, because if, for example, a person sees 20 images and then if he clicks load more, he wants to see 40 images in total. He doesn't want to lose the first 20 images. So that's why we need to keep previous images. Okay, and then we need to say set page to be the page number. Great. So this is inside try block, and then inside catch block we need to say catch error. So if there is some error, we can show it in the console and we can say set error to be the error message or an error occurred while fetching images. And looks like we have an error. We need to find out where we have this error. So here we have try, and yeah, it should be under this curly brace. Okay, and then finally we need to have a state when we want to say that our loading will be false. Okay, so now we need to say set, let's say set loading to be false, because as you can see here we say that loading will be true, and all this time it is remaining to be true, but we need to have a state when we want to set it to be false. So that's why we can do it like this. And we have one more error. Okay, let's find out. Oh, we need to have one more curly brace here, and the errors are gone. So we need to be always very careful when we work with these curly braces. Okay, so now we can use effect. So when our component just mounts, we want to call this function, which is fetch images. Okay, so by default, so the dependencies array will be an empty array. Okay, and here we want to fetch our images. So let's say fetch images, and here we need to provide our query, which is by default nature. Okay, so we want to run this function every single time our component mounts. So now we can save it, and in the console we should see our data. So let's do it. So looks like we have an error, and we have an error which says use effect is not defined. So let's say that we want to import it. Now let's close it, and now let's save this file, and here we have our texts. Let's open our console again, and here we have fetched data. Let's open it. So if we open it, as you can see, the page is 1, and per page we have 20. And photos, here we have our photos. Each photo contains some description, color, height, ID, then photographer name, photographer ID, photographer URL, then the source object, and then the URL. So this is how it looks. So here we have the image URL. Great. So now what I suggest to do is that we need to create a new component which will be responsible for image displaying. So let's say that here we want to create a new component. So let's create it. It will be image grid. Okay, so inside app.gsx, right under search bar, we want to say that we want to render our image grid component, and we need to pass to it our images. So let's say images, and we can do it because, as you remember, we have our state which is images, and then we can also pass the loading state. So let's say loading will be equal to loading. So let's save it, and now inside image grid component we can get access to our images and to our loading state. So let's say images and loading. And now we can do the following. Here we need to say if there is loading. So if loading is true and images dot length is equal to 0, we can return paragraph which will say loading images. Later, instead of this plain text, we will implement loading spinner. For now, it will be like this. And then we can have a situation where there will be no images found by a search term. So we need to handle that scenario as well. So we need to say if images length is equal to 0, and the loading isn't true, then we need to say no images found, try a different search term. Great. But then if everything is okay, we need to say that we need to have a div and it will be grid, okay? And then grid calls will be 1 by default, and then on smaller screens and higher, the number of columns will be 2. On medium screens and higher, it will be 3. Then on larger screens and higher, it will be 4. And then we can see that gap between the images will be 6, for example. Then we need to say that here we want to map our images, and ideally we need to have a separate component for our image card. So let's create a component for our image card. Let's say image card.jsx. Okay, so here we need to say that we map our images, okay, and here we need to use our component that we have just created. Great. And to this component, we need to say that we want to pass all the data of an image. Okay, so let's see, image will be equal to image, and then since we use mapping, each child should have a unique key, and in this case we can use image.id for that. Great. And then, as you remember, I said that we're gonna have our images, and then in the bottom we will have a button to be able to load more images. It means that after these images, we need to have a state where we will show loading more images. Okay, so let's remove this import, and now let's go to image card and we can get access to image. Okay, and let's say that here we want to do the following. We want to show the actual image. For that, we can use an image tag, and for the source, we can say image.source. And as you remember, when we looked at that image, there were different sizes like large, medium, and let's say that here we want to use medium. And for the alternative option, we can say image.alternative, or if there is no, we can say Pexels image, and we can apply some styles. Let's say that width will be full, height will be 48, and object will be cover. Okay, so let's save this file, and now let's save this file, and we have an error. So we have that image grid isn't defined at app, so looks like we didn't import it. Okay, let's save it again. And now we have one more error. We have that cannot read properties of undefined reading length at image grid. Well, to get rid of this error, we need to check it if it is null or not. So for that, we can remove this part by this. So first of all, here we have that we check if there are no images or images length is equal to 0. Okay, so by doing this, we check for null, and we will be able to get rid of that kind of errors. And the same thing can be done right here. Okay, so let's save it. And as you can see, we have that no images found, try a different search term. However, by default, it should be nature. Okay, it should be nature, but we have some errors. Well, guys, I found out that here we have image grid, but in this case, it has to be image card. Okay, so that's why we keep getting these errors. So let's save this file again, and we didn't import it. So let's say that we want to import it, and finally we see our images. So sorry guys for that inconvenience, but we are all humans and we make mistakes. The one who doesn't make any mistakes doesn't do anything. Okay, so now we have our images. At this time, we see only 20 images. Great. So now let's say that here we want to say, for example, wolf. Let's click search, and nothing will happen because we didn't implement functionality for our searching. So for that, inside app.jsx, we can create a function to be able to handle that case. So let's say that under this use effect, we can create a function called handle search, and here it will accept search term. Okay, and then we want to say set query. Let's say set query to be equal to search term and fetch images with our search term. Okay, and by default the number will be 1 because we will work with this number when we're gonna work with handle load more function. We're gonna have it very soon. Okay, but for now we have this function and we need to pass it to search bar. So let's say that on search we want to use this function, which is handle search. Now inside search bar we can get access to that function by saying on search. So now inside this search bar we need to say const handle submit, and here we can get access to this event object we needed to prevent the default behavior of a page when after submitting a form, the page is refreshing, but we don't want it. Then we say if search term.trim, we need to use this function since it removes deleting and trailing the white space and line terminator characters from a string. So if there is some search term, we want to pass our search term to this function, which is on search. Okay, now let's close this function properly. Great. So now we need to use this function when we submit this form. So let's say on submit, we need to use this function. Okay, so let's save it. And now I want to write something here. Let's say eagle. Let's click search. And as you can see, so here are our images. Let's finally check it on bigger screens. Okay, it looks nice. Great. So now we need to handle a case where a person wants to see more images. So inside app.g6, under this image grid, we can say that we can have if images dot length is more than 0 and there is no loading, only then we want to show something here. Only then we want to have a div, okay? And inside this div, we want to have a button and we can say load more images, and let's quickly apply some styles to it. Let's just accept it, okay? And for now, we can remove this function. So let's see how it looks. This is how it looks, and I want to have it in the center. So to this div, I want to say text center. And here it is. But I want it to be green, so let's say that it will be green, 600 here and 700 here. So let's save it. Great, it looks nice. So now we need to create functionality for that. So let's say that here we want to have a function called handle load more. Okay, so when it comes to this function, we just want to call our fetch images function and we pass our query and we just take our page and add one to it. And that's it. Okay, nothing complicated, just simple as that. So now when we click this button, so let's say on click, we want to call this function. So let's save it. And now I'm gonna click this button. As you can see, it says loading more images. And now we really see new images. And now we have load more images again. Let's click it. And now we see images again. That is great. Also, we have a state for our error, but as you can see, it is still unused. So to make it to be used under this search bar, we can say that if there is error, only then we can, for example, create a div. And here we want to display an error and we can just accept these default styles. Okay, so let's save it. Great. So let's see it on bigger screens. So here I want to choose a different search term. So let's say search. Great. So now when we click some of these images, I want to open it in Modal. Okay, so we can do that. And also we need to make this search bar smaller. Like we need to make its width smaller. Okay, so for that, let's come to this search bar and let's say that max width will be MD, which is 448 pixels. So let's save it. And we need to have it in the center, of course. And for that, we can wrap this div inside one more div and paste it right here. And to this div, we can say that it will be flex and justify will be center. So as you can see, now we have our search. And maybe it is too small because here I forgot to say that width will be full. So let's save it. And now it looks really, really nice. So now we can come to this image card, and when we hover this div, we can start applying some styles. Okay, let's just say that we want to apply some styles. Let's say background color will be white, rounded will be large, shadow will be medium, overflow will be hidden, cursor will be pointer. Okay, and then we want to say that we want to have transition on transform, and on hover scale will be 105. Okay, so let's save it. And as you can see, it is like this. But if we remove this transition transform, as you can see, we don't have some smoothness, I would say. So we want everything to be smooth. That's why we can leave it as it is. Great. So now, as I said, when I click this image, I want to see like a pop-up model. For that, we can create a new component. Let's say image model. Okay, so let's say that here we have our image card and we can remove this import. So after this div, we can have our image model. Okay, and let's wrap these two inside of a fragment so that we will not have some errors. And to this image, we can pass the image. Okay, and then here we of course need to have a state const is model open or not, and by default it will be false. And let's also import useState. Great. Then when we click this div, we need to say on click set, we need to use a callback function, and we need to say set is model open to be true. And then of course we need to have a function which will be responsible to close model, and this is how it's gonna look. And also we need to pass this function to this image model. Great. And then when we're gonna open this image, we may want to go to Pexels, not to stay on our website, but to go to Pexels. Okay, it means that we want to see the original image. For that, we can also create a function called handle view original, and we want to open a window, and we want to say image.url, and we say that it will be blank, so it means that a new page will be opened. And then we can say set is model open to be false. So let's take this function, and we also need to pass it to our image model. And also, of course, we need to pass a state if it is open or not. Great. Okay, now let's work with our image model component. So first of all, let's say that here we want to get access to the image, then to isOpenState, on close function, and on view original function. And here we need to say that when we pass it, let's say here on close model, let's just say on close, and here we need to say on view original. Okay, it will be more accurate. So let's save it. Great. Now inside image model, we need to handle a situation. So let's say if is open isn't true, we just need to return null, so nothing will happen. Okay, so let's save it. And as you can see, now we don't see that text, which is image model. But if we remove this, we see it. So that's why we need to have it. Okay, and now let's apply some styles to this div. Let's say that its position will be fixed and inside will be 0. It means that top will be 0, left will be 0, right will be 0, and bottom will be 0. Let's say that z index will be 50, so that it will be on top of all the elements. And let's say that flex will be items to be center and justify to be center, so that it will be, the model will be right in the center. And we can say that background color will be black with some opacity, which will be 60 in this case. We can add some padding, which will be 4. Okay, so now if I click this image, for example, as you can see, I have this some opacity, but let's refresh it to reset it. Okay, so let's say that instead of this text, we want to have a div, and here we will have some sections. Let's say that it will be model header. Okay, and here we can say that we want to have a div, and inside this div, we want to have h3 tag and image preview text. And to this div, we can say that background color will be white and around it will be large, a max width will be 4 XL, and max height will be, for example, 96 VH, and width will be full, and overflow will be hidden, for example. Again, all these styles are up to you. This is just how I do it. So let's save it. Now let's click this image again. And as you can see, we have image preview. Let's refresh the page to reset it. Okay, and under this H3, we want to have a button. So we want to have a button to be able to close it. And here it is. And to this button, we can apply some styles, which will be, let's say the text will be gray 500. And on hover, text will be gray 700. And text will be 2XL. And font will be bold. And to this H3, we can apply some styles, which will be text will be large, font will be semi-bold, and text color will be gray 800. So let's save it. And to this div, we can say that it will be flex, justify will be between, items will be center, padding will be 4, and I don't want to have any border bottom. So let's save it. Now let's click this image. Okay, it looks much better. And then when we click this button, we just need to call our function, which will be on close. So let's click it, and it is closed. Okay, now we are done with this section. Let's create a new section, which will be model body. And here we want to show the actual image. Okay, so let's say that here we want to have a div, and this div will contain the image. Let's say that padding will be 4 and max height. In this case, let's say that it will be 70 VH and overflow will be auto. Then here we have our image. When it comes to source, let's say image.source, let's say .large. Okay, and for the alternative option, we can say image.alternative or pexels image. Then when it comes to styles, we can say that width will be full and height will be auto, object will be contain, and max height will be 60 VH. Okay, so let's save it. And now let's click this image, for example. Okay. But as you saw, there was some delay. Okay, let's try, for example, with this image. As you can see, there is some delay, and I don't want to have that delay. And to deal with it, inside image card, we can create a use effect hook. So we can use use effect hook. So let's import it first of all. Okay, so we need to be able to preload the image first of all, and then we just want to show it. So let's create a function. Let's create a variable which will be preload. It will be equal to new image object. Okay, and then we need to say preload.src will be equal to image.source.large, and this use effect should depend on image.source.large photo. Okay, so let's save it, and now let's try one more time. For example, let's try with this image. As you can see, it happens immediately. Okay, I like this experience more. So let's continue with our model. So now we are done with model body, and we need to go to model footer. Okay, let's have a div, and here let's say that this div will have padding which will be 4, and then let's say that we will have a div, and this div will contain one more div, and this div will contain one more div, and this div will contain a paragraph. And here we want to display the name of a photographer, so we can see image.photographer. Okay, and under this paragraph we can also say that this name is a name of a photographer. Great. So let's say that to this div we want to say flex to be justified between, and items to be center, and margin bottom will be 3. Then to this div we can say that flex items center. Okay, let's save it and see what we have. So as you can see, here we have the name of a photographer and the caption which says that this person is a photographer. Then under this div we can have one more div, and here we want to say that we will have a paragraph and it will be for dimensions. Okay, and under this paragraph we can say that we will show the dimensions like this. It will be image width, then this icon, and image dot height. Okay, oops, let's see height. So let's save it. Now if we open, as you can see, here we have the name of a photographer, the caption, then dimensions, and the actual values. Great. So let's close it. So now we can start applying some styles. Let's say that to the image photographer, we can say that text will be small, font will be medium, and text color will be gray 900. Then to this caption, we can say that text will be small and text color will be gray 500. Okay, then when it comes to these dimensions, we can say that, let's actually open it, and we can say that to this div we can say that text positioning will be right. Okay, then to this paragraph, let's say that text color will be gray 600 and text will be small, and to this paragraph we can say that text will be extra small and text color will be gray 500. This is how it looks. It looks really nice. Then we can also show some kind of description. So under this div, we can say that if there is alternative option, okay, then we can say that we can display some info. But let's actually remove all of this. So let's just have a paragraph. And here we want to show image alternative option, and we can start applying some styles. Let's say that text will be small and text color will be gray 700. So let's save it. And here it is. It looks really nice. So under this description, we can create one more section which will be for action buttons. Okay, so here let's say button, and it will be for view on Pexels, and the next button will be to close it. Okay, so to this button, let's say that on click we want to call this function which will be on view original, and we can optionally accept these tiles. And when it comes to this button, we can also accept this. So let's save it. And this is how it looks. Well, let's say that to this paragraph, we can say that margin bottom will be 3, so that we will have some space. And we need to wrap these buttons inside of a div. And to this div, let's say that it will be flex and gap between them will be 3. So let's save it. Okay. And since we have this gap, we can remove this margin right. Okay, it looks cool. So let's see it on big screens. And this is how it looks. We can see it on Pexels. So let's actually click it. So as you can see, now we are being redirected to the Pexels, and here we can see it. That is really great. So let's actually open this one, and here we have the data that we need, and then we can close it. Let's open this one, and then you can control the opacity the way you want. So this is really great. Let's say that here we want to have, for example, penguin. Now I'm not gonna click button to be able to search it, but I'm gonna press enter. And now, as you can see, I have the pictures that I need. Let's click load more images. Great, let's click load more images. Great. That is really great. And now, as you remember, guys, I said that we need to have some animation instead of having just text which says loading and 3 dots. We don't want to have that. We need some spinner. So let's do it. So to do that, let's create a class which will be loading spinner. Okay. And let's say that we want to have a border, and it will be 4 pixels solid and this color. Okay. Then we want to say that border top will be 4 pixels solid and this color, for example. Border radius will be 50%. It means that it's gonna be rounded completely. Width will be 40 pixels. Height will be 40 pixels. Okay. And then when it comes to animation, let's say animation, let's say that name of the keyframes animation will be spin, then the time duration, like one complete rotation will take 2 seconds, then timing function will be linear and iteration count will be infinite. Great. And then we can see that we want to have margin, and from top and bottom it will be 20 pixels, and from left and right it will be auto. Okay, so now we need to use keyframes. So keyframes is a CSS rule that lets us create animations by specifying what styles should be applied at various points during the animation timeline. Okay, so now let's say that we want to have keyframes and the name will be spin, and then 0%, it means that it's start of the animation, it means 0 seconds. Then we need to say that we want to have transform property and rotate, which will be 0 degree. It means that the element begins at 0 degrees rotation, original position, and then when it is 100%, the element will complete one full circle rotation. Okay, so let's save it. So now let's come back to our image card component. Okay, I mean to our image grid component. So as you remember, I said that instead of this p, we need to use div. And let's say that to this div, we want to say that it will be flex, justify will be center, items will be center, and height, for example, will be 64. And then we want to have one more div, and to this div, we can add the class which will be loading spinner. So it is the custom class that we have just created. Okay, so let's save it. And now if I write something here, let's say lion, let's click search. We still don't see it. Okay, but we're gonna deal with it anyway. Well guys, I found out that here we have a typo, so let's remove it. Let's save this file again. And now let's say that here we want to have, for example, the following. Let's say elephant. So let's click search. And we still don't see our animation. Okay, let's continue investigating this problem. Well guys, I think that I found out what the problem was. The thing is, we get our images so quickly, we don't even see the animation. Okay, So now let's try to write something like this. So let's say, for example, salmon. Let's click search. It happened too quickly, so we didn't even see it. But now if I click load more images, and if I take, for example, this div, and if I use it right here, let's click save. Now let's click load more images. As you can see, we have some animation, okay? But we can apply some styles here so that we'll be able to see it better. So let's just apply this style so that call span will be full, and it will be flex, justify will be center, and items will be center, okay? Now let's click load more images, and as you can see, we have our animation. So that's it. But now if we write something here, and if we click search, it happens too quickly, so we don't even see it. But you guys remember that before we had this div, we had a text which said loading and 3 dots, and we saw that. But now, due to the fact that we get our images too quickly, we don't see it. So that's it, guys. If you find this video helpful, please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel if you haven't done it yet. Thank you, I really appreciate it.